All right, everybody. We are going to get started here. Again, thanks so much. We've got Nick Shah and we've got Corey Cournoyer here with us. So Corey is going to be joining us on audio, but Corey is here with us. We've got Nick here, got myself. So again, I think this is going to be quite valuable. We're excited and thankful that you're here with us. And I think in the interest of time, we will get going and having conversations together. So I'd love to get started just with some quick introductions and agenda of what are we hoping to do today, what would be what's the value, and get rolling with our conversation together. So we've got Xenett and STRMS represented by Nick and Corey. And really what we want to talk about is how to maximize efficiency with workflow automation and get into some specific granularities. What does this mean? What does this look like? Why is it important? But then let's dig into some nitty gritty on what this could really look like together. So I'm Ben Curtis. I run a cloud accounting firm based out of Tennessee, and I am just a humble moderator here today, going to be guiding our conversations together. We've got Nick here, so Nick Shah. So Nick's the co-founder of Xenett, and in a moment I'll let Nick give a brief introduction of himself as well. And we've got Corey Cournoyer, so CEO of STRMS. Both of these organizations are fantastic workflow and automation in various ways, organizations that can serve and support accounting firms. So Nick, would love to turn it over to you real quick for a brief intro of yourself.
Thank you, Ben. This is Nick. I'm one of the co-founder at Xenett. So just to give you a little background about Xenett, Xenett is actually an intelligent cleanup tool that fixes all the possible errors within seconds and allow you to fix on the go from our platform. And Xenett also allows you to streamline your close process by managing your close task, reconciliations, managing checklist, and as well as while managing review and close process, you can seamlessly communicate with your client for any open items and queries from our platform. So that's a quick intro of what is Xenett and its utility. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, that's great, Nick. Thank you.
Yeah.
Corey, would love to give you a chance. Tell us a little bit about yourself and STRMS, and then we can dive in the conversation together.
Cool. Hey, everyone. Corey Cournoyer, one of the co-founders of STRMS. So we focus on custom workflow automations. So we are not a app or a specific plug and play. What we do is we focus on working with other accounting firms to identify what their processes are, what their workflows are, and then building custom integrations between their existing tech stack. It's not just focused on the native integrations. We can build them completely custom and specific to what your team works on and how their flows work. And then we continue to monitor and maintain them for you so that you don't have to worry about those pesky zaps breaking.
Love it. That's great. Yeah, thanks, Corey. What we'd love to do is, with the rest of our time here today, just at a high level, these are some of the things that we'd like to hit on and we'd like to talk through. So the power of automation. Great buzzwords. What can we actually do with this? So Corey and Nick will be able to get into some specifics here. What the review and close process can look like with Xenett specifically, what a personalized workflow can look like with STRMS specifically, and then just on a granular level, what does it look like to affect your practice with some of the accuracy and efficiencies that these types of tools and tools outside of it, this type of mindset can do to serve your organization. So without further ado, we want to jump into a poll. And so Gina, if we could get this poll live for folks, you hopefully will see this popping up. And just curious if you have had familiarity with or heard of STRMS or Xenett before today. So we'll give about 15 or 20 seconds for that. So feel free to address that, and then we'll move on to our first round of conversation. All right, we'll give another second here, and then we'll get going. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to get that in, and we'll have a few more of these pop up throughout our conversation here today as well. What we'd also like to do is at the end, we want to block off some time for some Q&A. So we should have a chat that's available for you. Would love for you to have a chance to drop questions that are in your head, even at the beginning of this conversation today, or as we're discussing together, things to follow up on. If you'd like to pull on a thread that was brought up in conversation, feel free to drop things in that chat. And what we'll be doing is we'll be monitoring it, and we'll be able to talk through some of those things at the end. So yeah, so we want to take a step toward automation, and specifically what I'd like to do is get Nick and Korey talking through some of these things. So I have a question for either of you, Nick and Korey, and you can just think through this and give some responses here. I think there's a concept that a lot of folks, a lot of firm owners think that technology or automation in our practices specifically is the silver bullet. It's the silver bullet or the key to unlocking ultimate effectiveness, ultimate efficiency, highest profit ever, and that it's going to solve all challenges for all problems. So I would love to throw this question at you all. Why should automations broadly be considered as a piece of the puzzle in our practices, maybe even the final piece of the puzzle as we think through workflow and optimizing, as opposed to this is a silver bullet?
You can start, Nick, and I'll jump on.
Yeah, sure. So I think very first thing I would say that I see a lot of studies. I've recently heard that practices who have started adopting technology, or practices who have started adopting apps, I think they feel more confident in scalability, because through automation, one thing I can say that you can be assured about that there will be a lot of uniformity. There is a lot of scattered information. So automation bring back everything at a centralized place. At the same time, automation, we should consider automation more as a facilitator, because if we see revolution like ChatGPT, it did not took away job, but it is still working as a facilitator. So I still consider in accounting, a lot of this automation allows accountant to focus on their core areas. It also allows them to build faster, focus on growing their practices, and rest of all the mundane tasks, all the repetitive tasks can be automated. And yeah, I feel automation can be worked hand in hand, and yeah, can work as a facilitator for the accountant. Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, I think also I think a lot of people like to jump straight to automation because it's the sexy thing, right? It's the next level to their practice. But what I see too often is that people jump to automation without understanding the underlying impact to their workflows. And so when you jump straight to technology or automation, you don't actually fix the workflow. And so you fix one problem and create two more problems. By starting with kind of some of the workflows and understanding your whole process, like, it doesn't make sense to automate a process that is crappy in the first place, right? That's inefficient or is not systematized in the first place. And so I think starting with that, you can actually, maybe you don't need new technology, or maybe you don't need new automation. Maybe you just need to rework your process. And then once you define that, then you can always layer technology and automation on top of that. And I found that to be the best in terms of change management as well, so that you don't have silos of people focusing on automation in one department and then manual in the other, and different workflows. It kind of just, as Nick said, it brings it all together in the end.
Yeah, that's good. What would you all, either Nick or Korey, what would you say in response to somebody who might say, great, we've got workflows documented and processes documented, but in fact, the technology and the automation that we would like to implement, that fundamentally would change the workflow? So Korey, that could be a potential rebuttal to your point, right? Of, hey, let's get our processes documented and then let's automate it on top of it. Well, what about someone who would say the automation fundamentally may change the process itself? Is that a legitimate thought process? What would you push back on that? Would love to hear what you all think about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think we'll probably get into some of this later, so I don't want to jump too far ahead. But to answer your question, Ben, like, when I talk about process documentation and process organization, there's two pieces to it, right? There's kind of a little bit of a current state and there's a little bit of a future state. what people often do when they start jumping to process documentation and process optimization is they kind of blend those two states together, right? And so to your point, exactly, Ben, I agree with you. Like, you almost need a current state process documentation and then a little bit of a future state process documentation, because technology is beautiful and it works amazing. But there's also a piece of change management in all of our firms, right? And if you can't get the underlying team to support these automations or support this technology, I ask the question, is it worth it in the first place, right? And so by facilitating some of that change management with a current state and future state, I think can help enable a lot of this.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for letting me poke on that some. We'll go to another quick poll here and then move on with continue the rest of our conversation. And so hopefully we'll have a poll that's popping up as visible for you folks, but you can spend 10, 15 seconds. Would love to just see a response here. Do you have your current workflows documented? And we could say, to what degree do you have them documented? So take a few seconds to respond to that, and then we will move on. All right. Thanks for that. And Korey, maybe specifically, I think you began speaking about this, that process optimization starts with documentation of that process. So maybe tease that out a bit more for us, Korey. Why is that a true statement? Why does starting with documentation of what processes look like actually lay the foundation for effective optimization before we start introducing technology? So I think you teased us with that. Pull on that point a little bit more for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's the big thing I believe with technology. Forget automation or new tech stack, right? Just like technology in general. The change management is a big piece of this, right? And we want our teams to all embrace this and actually use it. And why are you? I asked the question to start. Why do you want technology, or why do you want automation? Like, what is it, right? Is it because it's the next shiny object? Or are you trying to focus on profitability or scalability or team efficiency? Like, what is the actual purpose of, optimizing your team? Because then you can kind of work back from there, right? If it's all about scalability, then you need to understand, are different teams or are different team members following different processes, right? It's easy as you grow that one person does one thing, the next person does another thing. And so layering technology onto different processes is not always the most effective choice. And so by understanding the full spectrum of your team's workflows and really understanding how do they do what they do, that's when you can start enacting change in terms of, okay, everyone needs to follow the same process. Or B, okay, well, you have this solid process. How can we leverage technology to optimize it further?
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's helpful. Moving on to a continuing on that thread, Korey, of process documentation, and Nick would love to get your thoughts on this. Maybe Nick, we'll start with you, then Korey can get your thoughts after this as well. So thinking through, hey, there's value in simplifying process documentation. Okay, is that actually true? Maybe Nick would love to hear you respond to the question, why would accounting firms, why would our practices, why would we not just automate the entire process? Why would we be okay with pieces of a process being automated as opposed to the entire process? And what I'm getting at is, I think there can be a thought that some firms can have of, I need to automate the entire thing, or there's no value at all. This all or nothing approach almost. Nick, why is there some value in saying, hey, automating a piece of a process, there's absolutely value in that? What do you think, Nick?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things accountants wary of is change. If you look at the current scenario, there are a lot of uh, tools and automations available out there. But one thing, accountants stay very busy throughout the year, and then they have to worry about time investment and implementation. If they have to invest in any tool, they need to consider about that. How much time I need to invest, how much time my individual's time or team time will go behind implementation team. And at the same time, now if you look at, you have solution for every single utility, right?
Right.
Let's just say if you want to automate AP, you have a solution for that. If you want to automate payroll, you have a solution for that. Now in this era of, whole tools on automation, it's very difficult to identify for a practice that which are the essentials tools, or which needs to be implemented, right? Because considering the short
Mm-hmm.
term and long term, it's sometimes it's a trade off. There are firms out there considering the long term, that okay, from the day one they want to place automation, considering that they would be able to scale and will be able to bring uniformity, versus there are practices which way they feel that they feel more control if they are doing everything, and they sometimes resist change. So I feel, and then above all of these things, there is always a data security in mind, that where is my data is going to lie, if am I exposed, am I my client's data exposed to anybody else. So these are the some of the concerns when it comes to automation or adopting an app. These are some of the factors an accountant consider, before implementing any technology or automation in the practices.
Hmm. That's good. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
Korey, maybe some thoughts from you, specifically on how there's so many tasks in accounting practices and accounting firms, so many different types of things. Could you focus on how automating critical or repeatable pain points, why there's potentially significant value in that specifically, rather than, again, I'm going back to the thought of I must automate an entire process, an entire, from point A to point Z. Why is there value and potentially even more effectiveness in automating critical, repeatable pain points in a process and focusing on that?
Yeah. I think the word comes back to simplicity, like we see on this slide deck, right? It's maybe I'm going to answer it a little bit different or expand on that question, Ben, a little bit. What I find that people do is they start getting to the process of documentation, and then they get themselves in a rabbit hole on saying, well, then there's all of these 100 different outliers to this process. But what about this? And what about that? And then, but if this happens, that happens, right? And you find yourself going down a rabbit hole of not actually getting very far because you're trying to figure out all of these nuances and how an automation works, right? Well, automations, for the most part, are pretty custom, right? Even if you're kind of doing it yourself on Zapier or building kind of using native integrations, there's still some level of customization there. And what happens when you over customize it and overwork these 100 granular nuances, it becomes a tool that is not really easily able to be managed, right? Because you have 100 nuances. And I go back to, why are you automating in the first place, right? It could be on profitability, it could be on scalability, it could be on just efficiencies and reduction of errors in your workflows. But a big piece that I think people forget about is just team training, right? Whether you have turnover, whether you have people that are taking PTO, right? The ability for someone else to jump into that workflow or that process and pick up the baton. If your workflows have 100 million nuances to them, regardless of whether you have automation, that becomes really difficult, right? And so focusing on these repeatable tasks does a few things. One is it still keeps a human in the loop, which I personally believe can be very valuable. Someone that's still there, not just having the automation do the whole accounting bookkeeping cycle, right? But having someone in that loop there to be that stopgap. But then it also allows for a more scalable automation system. When you have ones that are picking up just pieces of that puzzle, you find a more scalable solution, not just one that can be leveraged more, but one that when it breaks, because we all know technology breaks at some point, right? When it does break, it's much more easily able to be untangled and managed.
That's good.
Mhm.
Nick, any follow-up
Yeah,
thoughts to that?
yes, I would like to add, I think Corey rightly mentioned one of the thoughts just came up, that earlier, if you think that before automation or any app, now the knowledge transfer used to be a very difficult. Now it was very difficult, because lot of things even in accounting used to be a very subjective. So for example, let's just say if I am reviewing books, and if I'm managing 30 clients on my own, only I would be knowing that what are the certain checkpoints I am checking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine if if somebody has to replace, and it's very difficult to knowledge transfer all these things. So I feel that this sort of um, area does bring lot of reduce the human dependency. At the same time, it reduce the need of having somebody remembering. And then now this all things which is been done manually can be done part of automation or can be documented, so which helps practices reduce human dependency and can give more control at the practice level, rather than boiling down to the individuals the way of doing things, and also streamlines and standardize the way everyone operates. So yeah, I mean, just that's a one thought I thought. uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like
That's
to
good.
one
yeah,
more
yeah,
onto this and before we
yeah,
move on, if that's okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I hear from people a lot is, there's a underlying, I'll call it fear of automation, um, because it may replace people, right? Um, and that's one that I don't think that we should avoid. I think we should address that head on. And I'm not of the camp that automation is just going to replace all of these jobs, right? Will it replace some? Absolutely, right? But at the same token, if I have a really great team member on my team and I can automate their job, it's not to get rid of that person, right? If they're a really great team member, most likely you're going to leverage them in another area of the organization that can continue to provide value and continue to scale these systems up. Um, and so I want to take a step back and like remind people, like, why are you doing this in the first place?
I guess that is wise, because you're right. There's a thing, depending on where you would land as a firm owner or firm leader on the scale, more or less fear with that topic, certainly with our teams potentially. So I think you're right. Maybe a follow-up conversation one day could be this idea of up-leveling, upskilling your current employees. So great, introducing all this automation here, and using my fantastic team in different ways and utilizing them for different types of things. So I think it is wise to address this head on. You're right, and not be afraid of pain points or afraid of potential fears or concerns that we can have. Maybe one specific question, Korey, continue to pull on something you were saying, talking about these repeatable critical pain points and processes. Could you just to get really specific, what would be some
Sure.
examples of that in a broad accounting cycle? Let's just think of as maybe an average practice. What would be some examples, just to pull us down out of the clouds onto the ground level to some degree? When you're talking about that, what's some examples that come to mind there?
Yeah. So where I like to focus with firms is primarily on the onboarding process, because I think that it's a repeatable function, and there's tools out there like Xenett that work better on those kind of the actual accounting bookkeeping cycle. So I primarily focus with firms on that onboarding phase. So some like repeatable tasks is, okay, an engagement agreement is signed, you always file it away in a new Google Drive folder, a new box.com folder. A new client signs and you have to set up their workflow management systems within your Carbon or Canopy or Financial Sense accounts. It's whenever you get a new lead, maybe you always ask them for QuickBooks access before your first call, right? It's those steps that don't necessarily take an hour to do each time, but the more you can quickly automate them because they're just repeatable, they don't really change that much logic. The more you can focus on actually growing the business and bringing more customers in.
That's good. Yeah, thanks for that. That's helpful. Let's move on to, and we're seeing some things in the chat here, which is great. we will certainly address those. We've got some thoughts on that here, so keep them coming. This is helpful. I think, Nick and Korey, one thing specifically that a lot of firms can think through is this right here in this top left corner. There's so much that we have at our fingertips to consider and to evaluate as far as, Nick, you were even mentioning this earlier, whatever part of the accounting cycle or anything in your process delivery, whatever you want to automate, you can. There's something out there to automate. There's also something out there as far as specific applications to do anything that you want to do. So I think, to some degree, you're talking about automated workflows, and Korey, you're talking about maybe you don't even automate an entire workflow, just automate a key repeatable process. One potential barrier to that folks could have, that I have historically had even, is the question of, why is the juice even worth the squeeze here? As we think through, Nick, you mentioned data security. You mentioned it is difficult. It's a pain point in ripping off the Band-Aid and introducing something new. I have 1,000 things at my fingertips to consider. How do I decide and evaluate? So take that however you will, but to some degree, I think the underlying question is, why is the juice worth the squeeze here? Why would I not just maintain the status quo within my firm and how our processes are documented and how we're automating or not? So Nick, maybe give us your thoughts on that first.
Yeah, I would say that bringing automation or even adopting tools, one thing that definitely helps is, centralizing and bringing the uniformity the way, each and every one works, right? It also allows the practice firms to have more visibility and control on your practice, because now I know that a lot of accountants are started working remotely, and if were in office, it was very easy to manage things, have instant meetings and get things done. Now, with everybody working remotely, it's very important that, okay, I need to know that, what is the status of these clients, or what is the status of, my individual working on certain things. So definitely, having a platform or having, something, an app in place brings more visibility and control to the practice. At the same time, it also standardizes and streamlines various activity. And in the long run, it also reduces lot of areas, which was being done manually earlier, can be done by the system, right? So that allows accountants to now focus on core areas. Now imagine, earlier, you know, there are accountants, they have to spend a lot of time in reviewing the books, and still they are not confident about the numbers. Now imagine all checkpoints can be automated, and they know that, okay, they just straight away have to get all these system identify problems for them. All they have to do, they, okay, review and fix those, and then they can spend more time understanding the numbers, and they can give more value offerings to your clients rather than spending more time behind the numbers, number crunching. They should be more spending time advising their clients on a strategic level. So see that automation can definitely help accountants shift from just somebody who provides numbers to, they can shift that role from be an advisor to their clients. So yeah.
Yeah, toss that same thing to you, Korey. Why is the juice worth the squeeze, especially when we consider some of these objections that folks can have, if you want to call them that?
Yeah. The too many apps is definitely that's probably one of the biggest ones I hear, right? There's so many apps out there. Which one do I use?
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, that's where Streams kind of stemmed from, right? It was about connecting apps deeper. It's about, there are many apps out there. And if you actually look at and document your workflows, I'm going to go on a limb and say 80% of firms probably have people doing the same thing in multiple apps, right? And maybe there's good reason for the work being done in multiple apps. But the key that you want to do is make sure that they're talking to each other so that you only have to work with that data entry or that manipulation once, right? So that's a big key to that. And it's hard to choose which apps, right? Which ones do you use? Which ones are best for your firm? And when people ask me what should my tech stack be, that's such a hard question to answer because it really depends on what you're trying to do. What services are you offering? Where does your team sit? How elevated? Like there's so many variables in that. So I would not take it as just, choose a standardized tech stack and run with that when you set up your firm or when you would, optimize it. That's why I still go back to process documentation before you optimize it, right? Understand what you are trying to do and not just view an app as that silver bullet that's going to solve your whole workflows. But that kind of goes to too many apps and scattered information. Is like the same data often lives everywhere. And a lot of times you're telling your team, look at a client profile in my CRM. But if you're trying to get their CPA, then doing the workflow management system. But if you're trying to get their address, go in QuickBooks, right? Like there's all a reason for these data points to be living everywhere, but you need to have them talk. I think data security and resistance to change, those are interesting ones. I think resistance to change management is a piece of this, right? It has to be. There's no point in spinning up a new app or automation if only a fraction of the team that should be using it actually uses it, right? But why are people resistant to change? That's like the underlying question that we get at. Why are people resistant to change? I find that more often than not, they're resistant to change because they know their work, they know their workflow like the back of their hand, right? How many of our team members can just they just execute on it, right? It's because they know they've done it so many times. Incorporating change is not because it's going to be better and they don't want that. It's because they don't really understand how this is going to impact their work. And that's where I kind of full circle here, go back to the process mapping. If you can show them, here's how it works today, and here's how it's going to work tomorrow, and we're going to gradually work towards that together, I find that resistance to change becomes a lot easier for them, right? And then data security, I think that's getting up to bat, right? I think that's getting up to bat. It's not storing, social security numbers on a Google sheet. It's not emailing the tax return. It's those simple things, right? But that's getting up to bat. And I think a majority of the apps out there today understand that and recognize that. And a majority probably have that covered.
Interesting. Yeah. Nick, I suppose you and then Korey would love to hear your thoughts on this too. Just to get specific for folks, maybe we can't always answer the question for our friends in this space. What should my tech stack be? Of what applications do I actually consider, or what applications should I actually consider seriously? But do you have any frameworks or any help for folks on at least giving them a framework through thinking through, evaluating, and considering applications? I'm just trying to think through, okay, maybe I can't have Nick give me the answer, but I want to go to either of you and say, well, what questions should I be asking? How do I evaluate this as a firm owner? Any frameworks for logically thinking or evaluating app adoption within our firms?
Yeah, I mean, one of the, from my old back days, what I used to do is, I used to, on a piece of chart, if you chart out the entire process, right from beginning, let's just say bookkeeping process, right? And then you have, month end process, where you check things, and then you have closing task, you have certain things to do, and then you produce the reporting sent out to the clients. Now in this entire piece of all the activities, you have to identify for a practice that which are the important and essential elements at this current point in time, right? So for example, for a firm starting out, maybe their priority would be where they, with limited staff, they would like to get their bookkeeping automation in place, right? And then as soon as they start growing, they would like to get something, practice management system in place where they can start getting the visibility and control of all the activities that is happening on the client. And as soon as they grow more, they would like to get, other essential parts, as soon as like they have, other people helping them out, they can have other elements like review, close, and reporting. which can also become a part of tech stack. So if any firm, if they consider the entire workflow and identify that which piece of activity and workflow it's need of the hour, and based on that, they can decide that which is the best suitable app to address that workflow challenges, and accordingly they can decide on that. And what,
Yeah,
Corey, what do you
yeah,
think?
I think that's good. And
Yeah,
maybe just one
yeah,
final thought I would have is, we can think through things in concentric circles. So orders of importance and orders of priority, and what's the most valuable. Um, and just thinking through, hey, the most valuable process that I've got here, okay, what are some applications that can serve within this concentric circle? And then maybe what's the secondary tier of most valuable, most important things to my firm? Okay, now I'm going to consider what the applications are here. Maybe this tertiary tier. And I guess starting with what's most core to my firm, and then what are 3 to 5 things that I could consider for adoption. And I'm just going to ignore the noise for everything else right now. Great, I've got these core locked in. Now let's think in concentric circles of importance to the firm, if we can think that way, and at least properly prioritize the consideration of apps based on their potential value to our practices. So
Yeah,
one
let me
other
add
that's one other thought too.
one thing. The one thing is, when you're evaluating a tech stack, right? I think we're all moving towards a place of like cloud-based apps, right? That's kind of more standardized right now. But I think depending on the app, especially your workflow management solutions or your CRM or your payments, your payments management platform, invoicing and stuff like that, have them cloud-based, but also check. It's really critical. See if they have an API or see if they connect to Zapier. An API, what that is for everyone, is that's just simply a code that allows you to access the backend data of that, right? Why is that important? Because that's important whether you build on automations today or build on them in 24 months from now. Having that connectivity, that ability to do so is going to help you 10x, right? So focus on like which apps are not only cloud-based, but where can you connect them to other systems, right? I think that's a critical piece for people rather than just like, is it cloud-based or not cloud-based, right? Because then they can actually take that next step of connecting it to the rest of their workflow to automate it.
That's a great point, Corey. And that is an easy, actionable item for folks here. When I'm evaluating tech stack, that's one quick thing that I can do and look at in an application to see if that would play nicely as I'm looking ahead to the future too. That's great. What we're going to do next here, we'll skip ahead a bit. We've got a poll, so we can take about 15 seconds and just think through, hey, your current monthly reviews, and we can think through, where does Xenett fit into this specifically? What does that look like? So within your firm, whatever that means for you to be doing some sort of monthly review or monthly overview, we take 10 seconds or so. You could check off this poll. How do you typically do that today? Okay, we'll give another second there, and then what we'll do is we'll probably address have one more question here, and then we can wrap up the time that we've got together. So I think thinking through specifically automating and optimizing, and Nick, a question for you. Actually, this may be a more helpful visual here. A thought that I think you could give us some value on, Nick, would be, how could we measure the impact of automating? So we talked about automating, talked about, hey, there's some impact. Okay, let's measure what that impact actually is. How can we measure what that is beyond just a number of hours saved or an amount of time saved? So what are some other categories for evaluating the impact of some automation here within our practices besides just time saved?
I think one of the major factors, while considering the automation or adopting the app would be that it will increase your confidence in scalability. You will feel more confident that now you have certain pieces that are been streamlined, that are been automated, that you don't have to worry about. You don't have to do it manually. So there will be certain part, that you are assured that okay, with this in place, you will feel that you will be able to take, you know handle more clients. You will be able to efficiently work with your team, because having some systems or app in place will also improve and increase your visibility and control of your practice. That you'll be more organized, and more importantly, you know this also standardize the way everyone works. Because imagine, the accounting itself is very subjective, and everyone has a different way of dealing with things. But a lot of these things also bring uniformity, and also
Hmm.
reduces you know those mundane tasks and repetitive tasks, and allows accountants to focus on their core areas. Allows accountants to focus on value offerings to the client. So yeah, absolutely, I feel that automation will not, it definitely will help accountant and become a like facilitator to allow them to
Yeah.
focus and play on those areas which an accountant would always love to, because it itself is a boring job. But I feel that with ev- all these things in place, people have started enjoying the accounting, because they are enabling them to focus on the areas which they like and love it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good. I think one key
Yeah.
thing you hit on there, Nick, is the mental burden that this can alleviate for us as
Yes.
leaders and as owners. You're right, and it's hard to quantify that, right? It's hard to quantify a mental and emotional burden of loose threads living in our minds and not really living anywhere else, or living in our team's minds but not living anywhere else. It is hard to quantify, but it is real, and so there
Uh,
is value in that, and whenever you all figure out how to quantify that, let me know one day. But there is absolutely value in alleviating the mental burden of, it's not just ours. I'm happier as a leader in my firm, and my team is happier, and they're likely going to stay with me. Or my retention is higher. So there's a lot of those are fuzzy. Those aren't necessarily concrete takeaways or values, but I still think they're legitimate. So that's helpful. Maybe one final thing to end on here before we end our time today. Would love to just give you a chance, Nick and Korey specifically, just thinking through what are, in your opinion, specifically within the context of streams and the context of Xenett, what are some of the value that streams and Xenett specifically can have as accountants are looking to, we're trying to elevate our practices, right? So what value could streams, what value can Xenett bring in? And how could we not miss the potential value you've got here? Korey, maybe you can share with us first.
Yeah. So what we do is we actually focus on, we don't want to jump straight to automation, right? That's kind of, I hope, has been the message that I've brought across today, right? Don't jump straight to just pure automating your entire workflows. Start with process mapping and process documentation, right? That way you can optimize and then you can automate, right? One of the biggest things that we do when we start working with firms is we actually work with them on process documentation and helping them to define what that is, right? Kind of tying in your last question, Ben, um, where should firms focus? Like, I liked Nick's response, which was scalability, right? And scalability can mean a lot of different things. It can mean more, profitable. It can mean more customers. It can mean more team members, right? It's like, what is your metric that means scale to you? Right. And that's where if we focus together back on that process documentation, it's defining a process that solves that pain point or that works towards that scalability factor you're looking for. And then once we've defined what that process looks like for you, what your workflows look like to help you reach that scale that you're looking for, that's when we can focus on automation together.
That's good. Yeah, that's great. That's very helpful. Nick, why don't you share with us what's a specific way that Xenett can serve firms as we're thinking through this automation topic?
So we are on mission, to help accountants to reduce the close time faster by 80%. Like our focus is that how we can enable all these manual checks turn into automated checks, without they going and manually checking books, how all these checkpoints get scanned through your books and have all your errors, discrepancies, possible uh, variances, get all this identified automatically. You just need to find out areas that, okay, this all get automated, and you review that and fix that. And at the same time, bringing your all the closing task, all the communication, client communication, working files, everything in a centralized place. So that's eventually help practices feel more confidence in their numbers. At the same time, they uh, will be able to manage the entire close process in a very streamlined fashion.
That's great. Well, this is wonderful. So thankful to have this conversation with you, Nick and Korey. To our audience, thanks for joining us here today. We are particularly thankful for you, your patience at the beginning here. So what our hope is that you're having conversations like this and considering things with other firm leaders and the rest of your team. What we want this to be is a helpful drop in the bucket of stirring up conversation, stirring up consideration. Maybe this introduces topics or pulls on a thread in a particular way that we haven't thought about before. So we're thankful for you, thankful to be able to have this conversation together. You can find streams and Xenett both at various things shown on your screen here. If there's ever any way I can serve you personally, you could reach out to me just at a personal email, ben@goodmeasurefinancial.com. I'd love to just have any conversations. But with that, we will end the time that we have today, and we're very thankful for you. So Nick, Korey, everyone here, have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks very much.